G'day everyone, Michael from Battlebanker TV. Today what we're going to do is assemble a couple of models. This will be video in two parts. First we're going to assemble a plastic model of a Sprue, a GW kit, and then I'm going to assemble a metal model as well, and I'll show you the ways to go through doing both of those because there's different techniques you use if you want to do it the right way. So what we're going to assemble first, I've got a big box of Space Wolf parts here. What do we got here? So these are just normal Space Wolf Space Marines. This plastic thing here is called a sprue. Sprues contain all the bits and pieces that you need to make models. Usually with the GW kits, that's Games Workshop, all their models come on sprues, all their plastic models, and you'll generally get 5 to 10 guys on a sprue. In these boxes you get a few sprues, so they might be the same sprue, or one of them might have different models like for leaders or something like that. All we're going to do today is get one of the Space Marines off here. We're going to clip him out, we're going to glue him together, and I'll show you how all that goes. So, as models go, Space Marines are fairly simple to assemble. So, here's a close-up of our sprue. What we're going to need to assemble a Space Marine is a pair of legs, which are here, torso, which is here, and the torso comes in two parts. So here we've got the back of a torso. You can tell it's the back because it's got this little notch on it where the backpack's going to go later. We'll also have somewhere around here, this is the front of a torso. And so they glue together and form a torso together. Then we need some arms. Now on here we've got various arms. Here's an arm with a chainsword, an arm with a lightning claw, we've got arms with bolt guns. So you can arm your guys in different ways. Generally, if you're playing 40k, these are Warhammer 40,000 models, which we call 40k. Generally for assembling these models, you'll have figured out what you want based on your army list, and then build your models appropriately. And these sprues from Games Workshop are very good. They come with all sorts of different options. So you figure out what you want, build the models appropriately. So if we want to build a guy with a bolt gun, we're going to cut out some bolt guns. If we want a guy with a storm bolter, we're going to pull out a guy with a storm bolter. So we've got our legs, we've got a body, we've got some arms. What does he need? He needs a head. So somewhere on here, we're going to have heads, which are here. And then Space Marines also have shoulder pads, and shoulder pads are over here. So what we need to do is get all these parts off the sprue. How do we do that? Very simple. We use a pair of hobby clippers. Now, these are a Games Workshop product. You can get other brands as well, but these are actually very good. These are made for cutting plastic. They've got a very fine point on them, and when you squeeze them together, it's a fairly narrow tip, which is excellent because, if we can get this up close. See how on the sprue here, you've got these little edges. It holds the plastic onto the sprue, so it holds the part we want on the sprue. If you've got a pair of fine hobby clippers, you can get right in there, and when you trim that out, you're not leaving much behind. So that's really useful. It means you've got to do less cleaning later. So let's get some of these parts off. So, I need the back of this guy's torso. So I'm just going to put my hobby clippers in here and snip. And there's a bit down the bottom here, and this side as well. Now this is going to spring off when I clip the last part. So I'm just going to get my fingers in there and hold it. Done. So now we've got a separate backpack, or a separate rear of the body. So you can see here we've got this bit that we've trimmed off, and you can see on there's a little bit of extra on the outside there, and on the bottom here there's a little notch as well. On the bottom here there's a little notch as well, so we're going to need to trim those off. But we'll get to that later. So we've got the back of his body, now we need the front of a body. So we'll just have a look here. On these sprues, they tend to be all a bit different. So I'm going to choose this one here, which has got a little bit of a pelt at the front. Same as before, snip these off. So this one's got 4 little contact points on it. Again, these hobby clippers are excellent because they've got the very small point, they're easy to get in. Oop, 5 points, I missed one, there's one at the top as well. Now once again, just snip that off. So we've got the front of the body, the back of the body. These have little notches on the inside, so they go together quite easily. So we get our 2 parts. And push them together. Now you can see there that the two parts don't go exactly together. When we use our plastic glue, that's going to weld them together a bit more. And as a more advanced technique, if there are gaps left over, we can use putty called green stuff to fill in the gaps. We're not going to do that in this tutorial. This is just a really simple how to put stuff together. We'll go into that in a later video. So, we've got a body. We need some legs. I've got some legs just here. So snip those out. So his feet, the waist there. So how easy is that? Just 3 little snips. We're going to need an arm. So what are we going to give this guy? Keep this one a bit simple. What have we got? Alright, let's just give this guy a bolt gun, which is the standard weapon that most Space Marines have. So I'm just going to grab one, there's one at the top of the sprue here. Again, a couple of little clips. And there's your bolt gun. And so, if we have a look here, arms on a sprue come in left and right. So this is a right arm. You can see there's a flat space there where it's going to attach to the body, and the weapon moves this way. So if I turn it around, that's his shoulder. When we put the shoulder pad on, the shoulder pad's going to go there. So this is a right arm. So if we hold it this way, I can see that's my right arm. He's holding it that way, that's the right arm. So he's going to need a left arm as well. So I'll find something on here that has a left arm. Alright, so I've got a choice. I can give him a pistol or a sword. I think I'll give him a sword. So this is a left-handed sword. And again, you can see here, flat bits on the inside there. So when he holds it, he's going to go like that. The shoulder pad's going to be on the outside here. So if that's my left arm, that's his left arm. So we've got a left and right arm. So a body, left arm, right arm. We've got some legs, we need a head. On these sprues, we've got a huge range of heads. This is only some of the heads on this. There's a range of heads there, there's a range of heads up here, so we've got lots to choose from. Let's give this guy a bit of a wolf tail coming off his head. So just one clip, head, easy. Then he's going to need a backpack. All Space Marines have a backpack on. Again, there's quite a few on this sprue. I'm just going to grab this one, it's a fairly simple backpack. So we've got his backpack done. So that's basically all we need to make a Space Marine other than some shoulder pads. Again, this sprue has tons and tons of shoulder pads. There's a few up here as well. I'm just going to grab a couple of these. So I'll just grab a couple of fairly simple ones. Since our guy's got a wolf pelt on his waist, I'm going to give him a wolf pelt shoulder pad as well. That gives us that. And then there's one here with a little tooth or a claw hanging off it. So I'll just grab that one. So that's all the parts we need to make a Space Marine. So I can get rid of this now. There's enough stuff on this to make like another 8 guys or 9 guys. So we can push that aside and let's have a little look at what we've got. So these are the parts of the Space Marine. We've got the 2 parts of his torso here. We've got his legs. We've got both his arms. One there, one there. We've got his head. We've got his shoulder pads, which will go on his arms once he's assembled. And we've got his backpack, which will also go on once he's assembled. You can probably see on a few of these, there's a few little sort of light grey bits. That's distress from being cut off the sprue. Nothing wrong with that, it's just a bit messy. So we're going to just trim that down a bit. We do that with a hobby knife. So I've got a little blade here. This is just a standard hobby knife. Lots of companies sell them. We've got a few different brands here. These blades are sharp, so be careful with them. Definitely use under adult supervision if you're a young'un. But they're pretty safe to use, and I'm going to show you the right way of doing it. So being a lefty, I've switched you back over to my left-hand side, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to do this. There's a little bit here of plastic that we don't want. It's just left over from the sprue. So we want to take our hobby knife, and we want to just gently cut that away. Just trim it with the knife. So you want to cut away from yourself carefully, and just trim that off. That's not bad at all. There's a little bit left. I'm just going to very carefully. So here I'm doing very slowly. I'm not really applying any pressure at all. I'm just letting the blade do the work. If you press too hard, these are only plastic, you will cut into them, you could cut through them and hurt yourself, or you could cut off some detail that you want there. That's actually a technique you can use. If you want to, say, make the armour look damaged, you can cut bits of it out. Again, more an advanced technique, we won't really go into it here, but there are certainly things you can do with the knife if you're careful. So that's going to be good enough for this demonstration. There's a couple little bits along the edge here. If you remember, this had 6 contact points on it. Using the good clippers, you'll often be able to trim it down so you don't have to clean it, but sometimes, like these were a bit hard to get into even with those clippers. So I'm just going to carefully trim this down. Now I can feel there, I've pressed a bit hard, I've cut a bit too deeply into this one. As soon as you start feeling resistance, you've probably gone a bit hard. I'm just going to trim that off there. And around on the other side, we'll probably have a couple little... That one's not too bad, I'll just get a little nick on that. And just over here as well. So that's cleaned that up nicely. So that's the front half of the torso, and then the back half, again, we've got a little bit in here that needs to come off. So this is in the gap where the neck is. You'll often have to clean this bit. It's one of the bits that's always a bit of a trouble spot. But how quick's that? I'm done already. Now, you'll see that I'm disobeying myself there. I'm cutting toward myself. I've actually got my thumb in quite a dangerous place. I've done this a lot, and I've also cut myself a few times. But I'm pretty comfortable having done this a lot. If you're new to doing this, I wouldn't do it the way that I'm doing it. I would definitely take it and just gently cut away from yourself. Don't cut toward yourself. You can also put these things in a hobby vise. With plastics, it's a bit harder to do, and it's really not necessary. But definitely, if you're young, get your parents to help you do this, because it can be a little bit dangerous. You don't want to cut yourself. That's his back done. So we've got the front and the back half. Find out which way around they are. So we've got two little notches here, 2 little holes on here. So that's gone together nicely. You can see there's not much of a gap there now that I've trimmed that down. And again, once we glue it together, it's going to be even less noticeable. So we've got all the other bits of the Space Marine. Here's his bolt gun. I'm just going to have a quick look around here. So there's a little bit on top here. There's a little bit on the inside of his, where it's going to join to his body. So these parts are really important to remove because it's not going to go together properly if these little bits are in the way. On the outside bits, so say on the end of the gun here, that's not going to stop you putting the model together. It's going to look bad when you paint it, but it's not going to stop you putting the guy together. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Now, here's where we get into the other thing with these plastic models. And again, this is a slightly advanced technique, or something that you may not worry about too much when you're just starting out. You'll care about it later on. If you keep wargaming for a few years, you'll get to the point where this really annoys you. But early on, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I'm going to go through it with you because it is something you want to do at this stage if there's a problem. So we've got our gun here. And you'll be able to see along the top there, there's a very fine little line. That's what we call flash. So that's where, when they've moulded these pieces, the moulds haven't been pushed close enough together, or they've been slightly out of alignment, and you end up with these little lines. Can't really see them as much on the bare plastic, but when you paint this, you're really going to notice it, because it makes a line where there shouldn't be one. Now on something like a bolt gun, which is a mechanical item, it's not as big a deal. You can always say it's a seam line from manufacturer or something like that. When you're doing, say, a human model, which is bare skin, people don't have lines on them. How do you fix it? Take your knife, and rather than cutting into it, we cut on a backwards angle, on about a 45 degree angle. So we get our item here. I'm going to get my blade, if I can get you to see there. And I'm just going to put it backwards like that. And I scrape away. So I'm not cutting forward, I'm not cutting with the blade, I'm scraping with the blade. And that will just remove that flash line. Now it's pretty hard for me to do on this angle because I'm showing it to the camera, but that's basically the technique. I'm just going to take this, I'm just going to scrape down. You can see there on the end of my blade, or if you can see there, you probably can, there's little bits of plastic there, which I've just scraped off. So even using it backwards, I'm just getting those little bits of plastic off. So I'm just going to go around this bolt gun now, since I can see a bit of flash on there. Turn it around, look down his arm as well. So there's a bit of flash on his arm. usually, if you're not too fussed about this, you can just do a fairly cursory scrape like I'm doing. If you ever want to paint for competition or anything like that, you'll get in the habit of being really particular about this. Because it is something that you may not notice when you're putting the model together, but once you undercoat it, you will really know that you haven't scraped it properly. It becomes very obvious. So that'll do for this. I've got lots of other bits to have a look at. So we've got his sword, basically same deal here, just going to have a look around, see if there's any little notches I need to trim down from getting him off the sprue. You need to be careful as well, for example, on here. And part of this is just getting used to it. After you've done a few of these, you get used to what's there. There's a little notch on here, looks like a bit of flash. It's not, it is actually just a little bit of detail. So just be careful you don't cut any details off. If you do, don't worry too much about it. You'll get used to it over time. There's a fairly big blob on the back here. So I've just trimmed a bit of plastic off there. Something to be wary of when you're doing the Space Marines as well. As I said before, the shoulder pads are going to go around the outside. So don't worry too much about cleaning the top. It's going to have a shoulder pad over it anyway. But also just make sure it's flat enough that the shoulder pad's going to stick on nicely later. I'm just going to roughly scrape my blade down here. These chainsaws have teeth on them. They're not sharp at all, but they do run in a certain direction. So there's a good way to scrape and a bad way to scrape. So I'm just going to bit of a flick around there. Give him a bit of scrape around where the seam is. Also, there's some parts, like on this chainsaw here, you've got this guard, so don't press too hard on that because it is just a separate little bit of plastic. So that'll do for that one. His legs. Now, the seam on these is fairly noticeable. Even with my naked eye, I can see it pretty well. But look, it's done. Still a little bit of seam there. Someone who's really particular about it probably do a bit more than I just did, but I'm pretty happy with that. There's a little bit around the top here that I'm not quite so happy with. Sometimes just go in a bit of a different direction. So if it's raised detail, so I'm just pulling the blade along it this way, even though the seam is actually running that way, just scraping across the seam to get rid of that. Whereas on the leg here, I'm just scraping along the seam, and that's pulling it off nicely. Again, this is where his torso is going to go, so we don't need to worry too much about this. As long as it's relatively smooth so it can attach to the torso. It doesn't matter if there's a seam there, you're not going to be able to see it once the model's assembled. Again, once you've done this, even after you've done one box of Space Marines, you're going to have done 10 of these. Of course, not all models are Space Marines, but when doing models on Sprue, you're often going to have 10, 20 guys. After you've done a few of them, you're going to know what to look for on the rest of them. I've assembled a lot of Space Marines in my time, so I've got a pretty good idea where the difficult spots are. Now on these guys, the contact points where the sprue is attached to the bottom of his feet, top of his hips here, they're all spots that you're not going to see once the model's assembled. So not a big deal to trim them off. Again, all you're doing is making sure that other bits can attach to them later on. Might have noticed I wasn't already there. I did actually catch my finger with the end of the blade, but I didn't cut myself. Probably because I've done this a lot and have calluses. So again, be careful if you're a younger gamer doing it for your first time, even an older gamer doing it for your first time. Be careful, because you are using a knife and using it near your fingers, and your fingers are soft. So inside of the legs, don't forget the inside. You may not notice it now, but again, once you paint these guys, you're really going to see these seams on them. And you're going to think, why didn't I trim that off when I was getting ready to put the model together? I also do it before I assemble the guys. Some people don't. Some people like to assemble them and then cut off what they can see. It's just a lot easier to get the blade in now before the guys are put together. Okay, head particularly important, because when people look at your model, the head's what they're going to look at. Like looking at another person, you generally look at their face first. So if the head's bad, they're going to see that there's problems with their head, and they're going to look at the rest of the model and see what other problems they can find. So if you make the heads good, you can get away with a bit in other spots sometimes. Something like this top knot here, not really something you can clean up because it's got so much detail on it, so just a quick scrape, just to get rid of anything that's obvious. No other contact points on there that I can see that need trimming down. Backpacks are generally pretty bad for flash as well, and sprue marks, just because of the way they attach to the sprue. So you can see on these shoulders there's a fair bit there that needs to be trimmed off. So once again, just carefully what I want to do is basically just round this down. Now another way you can do this, particularly on something like a Space Marine and particularly on a backpack like this, you can actually use a file rather than a knife. If you want to get it back to a nice round shape, I'm just doing these quickly so I can show them to you, but you are probably better using a file or trimming it down and then just rubbing a file across that, which I'm not going to bother doing right now, but it is definitely a thing you could do. On the top here on backpacks is often where you get a lot of flash, and on this model there is a lot of flash. So same technique, take my blade, about 45 degrees, just scrape it. And then on the tops and on the sides. There is detail on the sides of these. There's like a little bolt there, so you just got to be careful. You don't want to take that off when you're scraping. So just scrape carefully either side of that. And then up this little ridge here. There's lots of little inner bits on these backpacks, which makes them a bit of a pain to clean the flash off on sometimes. So that'll do. And then we've got all the way down here, out on these exposed joins. On the other side. Again, if you're new to doing this, don't worry too much about this. I'm a bit particular about it because I've painted a lot of these guys. I've got a fairly consistent look going, but if you're new to it, don't stress too much about this. I can still see a bit on top there, and there's a bit down the sides of these vents. Alright, so that's done. So I've just got his shoulder pads. Again, shoulder pads are a bit notorious for the way that they stick them on. So there's a little bit on top here that I want to get rid of. And some bits down the sides. Don't tend to get too much flash on shoulder pads. They tend to put them in a position on the sprue where they don't get a mould line. But they do often get these just bits where they attach them to the sprue. Can be pretty bad. You see that I'm just blowing away the little bits of plastic that I'm cutting off because they'll tend to either stick to the knife or stick to the model. And that's basically done. So we've got all the bits we need to assemble our Space Marine. Let's put him together. So we've cut our men off the sprues. Now we need to stick them together. This is plastic glue. This is Revol Contactor Professional. It sounds impressive. It's not really. It's a basic hobby glue, but it is the best basic hobby glue you can get because it has this needle on the end. So the glue comes through the needle, makes it very easy to apply in small quantities, which is what we want. What plastic glue does is it actually melts the plastic and makes a chemical bond. So it doesn't do it through heat or anything. It's not really dangerous to use. You can get yourself covered in it and you don't want to drink it, but it is very safe to use. You don't want to inhale the fumes too much, so use a well-ventilated area. We've got a very large room here. So all we do is give it a gentle squeeze, and we're just going to run a little line just around the outside of the torso here, so where the two bits are going to stick together. So I've only used a little bit. Then we get our men, make sure we're doing it the right way up. So I'm holding his neck on this side, so I'm just going to put this bit on. I'm not actually doing upside down now. So now we've got it the right way around, put the two little bits in the holes, and all I'm going to do is squeeze it together and just have a look, make sure the edges line up. There's these circles on the side which are where the arms go, so you can use them as a guide to make sure it lines up nicely. So I've got it fairly nicely lined up on both sides now, and he's just going to take a couple of minutes. It'll take about 20 minutes, half an hour to dry fully, but after about 5 minutes it's dry enough. So then we've got all the other various parts that we're going to use. Now I'm just going to go ahead, this is stuck together now, it's not going to fall apart on me, so I'm just going to stick the bits together. So I've got his legs, and here's his hip section here, and here's the inside of the waist there. So those two parts go together. So again, on this part here, I just put a dab of glue. I'm just going to smush it around a little bit. I'm going to stick his torso together. Now this is where plastic miniatures are great. I can stick this on however I like. So he can look forward. If I want him to be looking over his waist, like back behind himself or something, I can do that. I can have him leaning back, I can have him leaning forward. It does depend a bit on how the model is. So this one with that big wolf pelt in front is a bit hard to pose in some positions. So I'm just going to put him fairly straight forward. And you can see that I pushed a bit hard and it's pulled the two halves of the torso together. If I'd waited for the torso to dry first, that wouldn't happen. Once this glue dries, as I said before, it's a chemical bond. Physically, these two parts have been welded together, basically. But because I didn't wait for it to dry, that hasn't happened yet. But that is what is going to happen in about half an hour or so. So I've just stuck his legs on there. Go ahead, this is the notch where the arm goes. So put a blob there. Another great thing about these plastic models is that they do have a fairly flat join, so it's very easy to get the parts to go together. You can, if you want the models to look even more different, you can file these joints down a bit to get some other angles out of them. A lot of the other kits, particularly the fantasy kits, have a round join rather than a flat join, so you can get a lot more motion into the arms. These, particularly Space Marines, are made to be easy to put together. They're a very good starter army for that reason. So I'm going to put his left arm as well. You remember we talked about left arm, right arm earlier. It's hard to go wrong. If you stick the arm on the wrong side, you're going to know it because the weapon's going to be facing the wrong way. So I can see here I haven't got his torso exactly lined up, so this arm's having a bit more trouble going on. I'm just going to put this arm down a little bit. Now, because it takes a while for this glue to dry, you can see I've stuck him together, but I can still pull it off again. It's gone a bit tacky, so you don't want to do it too much. If you don't like what you've done, you can always get it off. Just be reasonably fast about it. You've got a couple of minutes, and you can get a better position. So I'm still not happy with that. So here we are. We'll put him like that, so he's going rawr. Matt's laughing at me. Do his head as well. So just stick his head on. Again, normally better to wait a bit between this. And if you're assembling 10 guys, you want to assemble the bodies, then stick the bodies on the legs, and then stick the left arm on, and then stick the right arm on. And it gives a bit of time between for them to set a little bit further. Something else to bear in mind when you're assembling guys is when you're going to paint it, how are you going to get in there? So if I put this sword down like it was before, it's going to be hard to paint his body because there's a sword in the way. So sometimes you might not glue these parts on until later on. You may actually paint the model first and then stick the arm on if it's going to be in a spot that gets in the way. I'm doing this guy with his arms up in the air, so if and when I do a painting video to show you how to paint this guy, he's going to be relatively easy to paint. So that's him with his head. So that's pretty much an assembled guy. He's got legs, arms, head, all that sort of stuff. He still needs his shoulder pads, so let's whack them on. Now, shoulder pads don't necessarily have a front and a back. Some, because of the detail on them, will look like they have a front and a back. Like, say if they had a wolf's head or something, it might be facing a certain direction. You may want to put that to the forward. So that would determine which one's the left and which is the right. These two don't. They're pretty generic. So I'm just going to whack this one on the right-hand side. And these just slot in. Some people stick the shoulder pads on before they put the guys together. I don't recommend it. It restricts too much how you're going to pose the guy. Whereas now I can sort of just hold this shoulder pad on here and rotate it a bit till it looks good. So that looks pretty decent there. You see around the front, not too bad at all. Now this one's probably going to be a bit trickier because of the way I've posed his arm. I think this little top knot thing's going to get in the way, so I may actually have to move his arm a bit to get this to go in. So it is, the top knot's in the way, so I'm just going to have to push it down a bit there. Alternatively, I could turn his head a little bit. So that looks good from here. How does it look from the front? It looks pretty decent from the front too. I'm pretty happy with that. And then, as we said before, all Space Marines have a backpack. There's a little notch here in the back of the backpack, and there's a little notch on his back. Very easy to get a backpack to go on. So just a dab of glue in the notch, and I like to put a little one just above the notch as well, because it's a flat spot on his back, and it'll get a really good bond. Now, you don't need to use plastic glue, you can use super glue. There is one advantage, or one major advantage to using super glue, and that is if you ever want to strip the paint off these guys and paint them again, say you're new to it now and you're going to paint them and you think, oh look, you know, in a year when I'm a better painter I might want to come back and do them again. If you've used super glue to stick them together, when you strip the paint off them, the super glue will go fragile and you can pull them apart again. If you've used plastic glue, as I said before, it's a chemical bond. The guys are together. This guy is going to be this guy forever now. look, you can cut them apart. It's a lot of effort. I personally tend to actually use super glue on most of my plastic models these days, unless it's a vehicle where it needs the strength of the super glue, of the plastic glue to hold together properly. With a guy, I tend to just use super glue so I can pull them back apart again if I want to. Personal preference, in the early days, I would definitely recommend using plastic glue. There are a couple of different philosophies on painting before you glue and gluing before you paint. I like to assemble my men and then paint them. As I mentioned before, sometimes a bolt gun or a sword or something might get in the way. You may leave that one particular arm off. That's a case where I definitely use super glue to add it later, because if you spill the super glue onto the paint job, it's much easier to pull off than plastic glue, which will tend to melt the paint. Super glue will potentially stain it white if you don't clean it up properly. Another philosophy is to paint on the sprue. I don't recommend painting on the sprue for the simple reason that if you paint it on the sprue, when you clip the little men off, as we were showing before, I had to clean off those little notches that were appearing everywhere. If you do that, you've then got to touch up all those little paint spots. So particularly on a Marine with the shoulder pads around the top of the head on the backpack, you're going to have heaps of little spots that you've got to clean up afterwards. Much easier to assemble the guy and just paint him as a guy. If you're doing vehicles, there is more of a case of doing it on the sprue, but for men, I would definitely assemble the guy first before you even think about painting him. So that's all for the assembling a plastic guy tutorial. In part 2, we're going to do a metal man. Alright, so we've... want to put our camera up higher?